Welcome to the Sleepy Horror Vault, the channel where darkness meets dreams. Tonight we bring you The Tunnels of Cairo, a haunting story set beneath the ancient city of Cairo, where long-forgotten tunnels hide secrets older than the pyramids and a spirit that only becomes human when midnight falls. Our goal is to help you fall asleep quickly and deeply. Each story is accompanied by special music designed to lull your mind into a state of calm, guiding you gently into the shadows of your subconscious. So lie back, close your eyes, and drift into the vault. The story begins now.
Welcome to the Sleepy Horror Vault. My name is Sophie. I will be your sleep companion for the night. Relax and close your eyes and you will fall asleep before you know it. Chapter 1. The Map That Shouldn't Exist. Dr. Erin Monroe stepped into the burning light of Cairo with a map in her satchel that had no right to exist. The heat hit her like a solid wall the moment she exited the airport. A dense, dry wave of sunlight, dust, and exhaust clung to her skin like a second layer. Horns blared in the distance. Voices shouted in Arabic from nearby taxi drivers. Above it all loomed the noise of a living city, layered, ancient, modern, and alive. Cairo was everything Erin had remembered and everything she had feared. She hadn't set foot in Egypt in over 10 years. The last time had ended in silence, tears, and 2 months in a psychiatric wing after an excavation went horribly wrong outside Luxor. Since then, she'd taught, lectured, and stayed far away from fieldwork. Till now. Until the map. She clutched her satchel tighter, moving through the press of people toward the taxi rank. The map was inside, rolled carefully in oil paper, bound with string. Absurdly plain for something so powerful. Discovered by accident in a mislabeled archive box at the University of Western Australia, it had been filed under colonial shipping routes. She'd been looking for something else entirely, maritime records, but instead found a relic older than the paper it was written on. Erin had spent the next 5 nights translating symbols that weren't supposed to exist. Most were ancient Arabic. A few were Coptic. Some were unidentifiable. At the top corner of the map, etched faintly in Latin, was a phrase that had haunted her since she first read it. Midnight is the key. She didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but she intended to find out. The taxi driver was talkative, cheerful, and entirely unaware of the ancient thing riding beside him in the back seat. Erin offered only short responses, too focused on the familiar skyline returning to view. The mosques, the colonial-era buildings, the modern chaos layered atop foundations laid down over millennia. Cairo hadn't changed, but she had. The guest house was tucked into a narrow side street in the district of Al Khalifa, near the old mosques and mausoleums. The proprietor was a woman in her 60s, draped in dark linen, who welcomed Erin without question. She had paid for the room in advance and used a pseudonym. No one knew she was here, not even her closest colleagues. The room was small, dusty, and perfect. A single window with wooden shutters. A narrow bed. A desk. A fan that wheezed like it might die at any moment. Erin locked the door, drew the curtains, and placed the map on the desk. She hesitated. Then slowly, reverently, she unrolled it. The ink was still crisp, almost fresh-looking, which shouldn't have been possible. The lines traced a subterranean web beneath Cairo, some parts labeled, some shrouded in mystery. Symbols marked intersections. A drawn eye, a pair of crossed lines, a downward-pointing triangle. 3 places had the eye with crossed lines. Entrances. She took out her notebook and began to compare the map to modern coordinates. It wasn't a perfect match. Cairo had shifted over time. New buildings. Lost alleys. But the shapes were close enough. One of the entrances, if it was an entrance, seemed to be located beneath the Sultan Hassan Mosque. Another was under the edge of the citadel. The third was almost exactly where she was sitting. Erin looked down at the floor, then at the walls. The stone was old, older than the building. There were marks on it, maybe just scuffs from furniture, or maybe... She shook the thought away. Coincidence? Still, she traced the lines again. In the corner of the map, the Latin phrase repeated, just slightly different in spelling. Clavis est media nox. The key is midnight. That's when it hit her. The small clock drawn in the upper margin, she had assumed it was ornamental. But now, with the light casting shadows just right, she could see the hands weren't pointing to 12. They were pointing just before it, to 11:58. Almost midnight. The key wasn't just time. It was a moment. A narrow window. Erin reached for her glass of water and paused. There, a sound. Faint. A whisper of wind that shouldn't have been there. She turned slowly. The shutters were closed. The fan was off. She wasn't alone. "Hello," she said softly. No answer. Just silence. Not empty silence, watching silence. She swallowed hard. Maybe she was just tired. Jet-lagged. The stress of returning. Of what had happened before. But something in her gut said no. She packed the map carefully back into the tube and slid it into her satchel, then lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling fan. The blades creaked slowly as the motor tried to stir, catching in the heat. From somewhere, she wasn't sure if it was a dream or her mind slipping, a voice began to speak. Soft, almost kind, but not human. "You've brought it here again." Erin sat up. The room was empty. She hadn't slept. Had she? The shadows were longer. The sun was setting. Her watch read 6:34 p.m. Outside, Cairo was preparing for evening. Voices rising, shopkeepers lighting lanterns, children laughing in the street. Inside, everything was still. She looked down at the map again, at the tiny hand drawn on the clock face, and she whispered, not knowing why, "Midnight is the key." Chapter 2. The whisper beneath the stone. Erin didn't sleep that night. She tried. She lay back on the stiff mattress, closed her eyes, and counted her breaths, a technique she'd used during excavations in war zones, intense pitch too close to danger. But here, in this quiet guest house nestled inside Cairo's oldest district, sleep remained out of reach. Something was off. It wasn't just jet lag, nor the adrenaline of the map's mystery. It was the room itself. The air felt too dense, the silence too complete. Occasionally, the shutters rattled without wind, or the floorboards groaned in a rhythm that didn't match the building's old bones. By 3 a.m., Erin sat at the desk once again, barefoot, staring at the unfurled map under the desk lamp's pale light. The ink didn't shimmer like before. Now it looked darker, more saturated, as if the lines had absorbed something from the night, or perhaps from her. She traced a long tunnel with her fingertip, starting beneath the citadel and arcing downward like a serpent's spine. The end of it disappeared beneath a symbol she hadn't noticed until now. It was small. So small that, in the lamplight, it looked like a fleck of dust. But it was no mistake. A triangle within a circle, surrounded by 7 tiny stars. She grabbed her notebook and flipped through the reference sketches she'd made. That symbol wasn't in any of them. Not Arabic, not Greek, not Coptic, not Sumerian. Nothing she'd studied matched it. Yet it looked familiar, as though she'd seen it long ago in a dream, or in a memory that didn't belong to her. She copied it down carefully. Then, from behind her, the sound of a single footstep. Her breath caught. She turned quickly. Nothing. The room was empty. The floor was still. But she'd heard it, not the creak of furniture or shifting wood. Soft, barefoot. Right behind her chair, Erin stood, her skin crawling. He checked the hallway. The guest house was quiet. Not even the usual city sounds penetrated these thick stone walls. It was as though the building had been severed from the world. She returned to the room, heart hammering, and carefully rolled up the map. She wasn't afraid of myths, but she was afraid of things that whispered your name when you were alone. And that's what she had heard next. Not a voice exactly, but a sensation. Her name breathed into the hollow of her mind. Erin. She didn't sleep after that. At sunrise, the city returned. The muezzin's call broke the silence like a blade. Sounds of life resumed. Trucks, sellers, bicycles. The walls seemed to exhale. Erin left the room at first light, carrying only her satchel and a cheap phone with no SIM card. She had written down the location of the first marked entrance, beneath the Sultan Hassan Mosque. Not inside it, but near the base of the slope leading to its foundation. The streets were cool and golden in the morning light. Vendors swept their stoops. Steam rose from pots of mint tea. The world looked ordinary again, but the memory of the night pressed against her chest like a weight. She reached the base of the mosque just before 7 a.m. The structure loomed over her, massive and ancient, its stone weathered by centuries. She didn't try to enter. Instead, she circled to the rear, past a crumbling stone retaining wall where no tourists wandered. There, half buried in rubble and earth, was what might once have been a doorway. It was blocked by large stone slabs, carelessly arranged, almost as if someone had tried to discourage entry but not completely seal it. Erin's breath caught in her throat. She knelt and examined the stones. On one, barely visible, was the same symbol she'd found on the map, the triangle inside the circle with 7 stars. She brushed away the dust. Her fingertips tingled. The stone felt colder than it should have. She stayed there a moment, one hand against the carved surface, listening. Not with her ears, but with something older, deeper. There was no sound, but something stirred. She felt it like the weight of unseen eyes, a waiting presence. And somewhere below, very far down, a low hum, faint but real. It wasn't imagined. Erin stood, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. That night, she returned to the guest house and waited. As the city dimmed, as lights flickered off one by one, she lit a single candle and placed it on the map. Midnight approached, and when the clock in her room clicked from 11:59 to 12 o'clock, the candle flickered violently. The flame bent, then surged upward, and the air shifted. There, behind her again, the step. Barefoot. Slow. This time she didn't turn. She whispered, "Who are you?" Pause. Then, in a voice that sounded like wind moving through stone, "I am what they left behind." Her skin prickled. She turned slowly, heart pounding. There was no one there, but her shadow was no longer alone. Chapter 3. The Man from Below. Dr. Erin Monroe stood in the flickering candlelight, heart slamming in her chest, watching her own shadow stretch unnaturally across the guest house wall. A second silhouette stood beside it. It didn't move. It didn't speak, but it was there. Tall, slender, distorted, as if the figure had been cast from a body that didn't quite fit human proportions. Shoulders too high, limbs too long, but in the flicker of the candle, it stood still as if it had always belonged to her wall. She blinked once and it was gone. Erin exhaled sharply, her throat tight. Sweat rolled down her neck despite the cold that had crept into the room. She blew out the candle, half expecting the darkness to swallow her completely. It didn't. The sounds of Cairo had returned. Faint traffic, a dog barking in the alley, the low hum of an air conditioner unit nearby. Normalcy clawed its way back into the space like a wounded animal. But she wasn't normal anymore. That thing, that presence had watched her. No, not just watched. It had stood with her, like it had always known her name. The next day, Erin returned to the blocked entrance near the mosque. She came prepared, small tools, gloves, and a folding pry bar tucked in a nondescript canvas bag. The early sun lit the stone like gold, but she felt no warmth. Something below was pulling at her, calling her downward. She worked quickly, sweating despite the morning chill, glancing over her shoulder every few minutes, as if someone or something might come walking around the corner. The rocks moved easier than expected, almost like they wanted to be moved. An hour passed, then another. Finally, the last stone rolled aside, revealing a rough archway of crumbling brick and shadow. Beyond it, only blackness. Not the kind caused by lack of light, but the kind that felt alive, pressing outward from the dark like a held breath. She pulled on her headlamp and stepped inside. The air hit her like a physical force. Cold, wet, and heavy. She paused in the doorway, letting her eyes adjust, listening. Nothing. The passage sloped downward. Narrow. Carved into bedrock. A water channel, maybe long dried. She pressed forward, footsteps echoing faintly. The walls were marked, not with paint but with scorch marks. Strange symbols burned into stone. Circular patterns. Spirals. Crossed lines. Over and over again that same eye. The deeper she walked, the more she felt it, time uncoiling around her. Minutes stretched. Seconds pulsed. Her own breath sounded distant. She didn't know how far she had descended when the tunnel suddenly widened. And there, standing in the dead center of the chamber, was a man. No sound announced his arrival. No footstep. No whisper. He was simply there. Dressed in ragged cloth that shimmered faintly as if stitched with metal or stars. His eyes glowed, not brightly, not theatrically, but with the soft, internal light of moonlit water. Erin stopped. "Who are you?" she asked, barely able to speak. He tilted his head. His features were almost beautiful, angular, and wrong in subtle ways. His face looked like someone had studied humanity and imitated it with eerie precision. "I remember you," he said. His voice was calm, measured. It echoed strangely, as if coming from behind her, not in front. "I don't think we've met," she whispered. "Not in this body," he said. "But I have waited for your blood, for your mind, for your permission." Permission. He took a single step forward. She didn't back away. Something in her wanted to know more. "I was one of the architects," he said, eyes never blinking. "We came long before the stone cities. We came when the world was still speaking the first names of light. But we stayed too long." She gripped the strap of her satchel. "You're not human. I was once, and I will be again. Each night, for a little while." Erin couldn't breathe. "What are you?" He raised his hand. Thin fingers. Half-gloved. Not threatening. Just old. Something left behind. He stepped into the light of her headlamp and she saw the truth. His skin was cracked. Not from age but from pressure. Like pottery glazed and baked too long. Something inside him was trying to escape. He lowered his voice. "Each midnight I walk again. In a borrowed shell. But it is breaking." She backed away a step, but he didn't follow. "I need your help," he said. "You brought the map. That means you heard the call." "I found it by accident." "There are no accidents," he said softly. "Only echoes." Erin's mouth was dry. "What do you want?" He turned away and gestured toward the far side of the chamber. There, half buried in stone, was a doorway, sealed with metal, covered in symbols that pulsed faintly in her lamp's glow. "Help me open the gate," he said, "and I will leave this place." "Where will you go?" His voice was barely audible. "Home." She returned to the surface just before sunrise. No one saw her leave the tunnel. No one noticed the dirt on her clothes, the tremble in her hands, the horror hidden in her eyes. Back in her room, she stared at the map. The lines had shifted. 3 paths now glowed faintly, like ink reactivated by air. They connected 3 symbols. 3 places. 3 doors. The man below had shown her only the first. 2 remained. Chapter 4. The first door. Erin Monroe didn't sleep the night after she met the man from below. She couldn't. Her mind was trapped between fear and awe, torn between centuries of logic and something that whispered beneath her skin, telling her that reality, her reality, was no longer whole. At dawn, she made coffee with trembling hands. The guest house kitchen was quiet, its tiled walls still cool from the night. She stared out the window at the waking city while the kettle boiled, her thoughts spiraling around a single image. The crackled skin of the being she had spoken to, and the way it had spoken to her, like it knew her better than she knew herself. Each midnight I walk again, but the shell is breaking. He hadn't said what would happen if it broke completely. Erin returned to her room and rolled the map open across the bed. The ink had changed. 3 pathways, drawn in faint shimmering strokes, now pulsed across the parchment. One was behind her, the tunnel she'd entered beneath the Sultan Hassan Mosque. The second led beneath a ruined garden near the old cemetery of Carafa. The third, the line bent sharply across the map's bottom corner, disappearing beneath what was now a modern hotel built on the ruins of a Roman fortress. 3 doors, 3 keys, 1 promise, freedom, or something worse. By nightfall, Erin was back at the first site. She returned to the same chamber where she had first seen him, the man who claimed to have been an architect of something older than history itself. But this time he didn't appear at once. Instead she waited. 10 minutes. 15. The air grew colder. Her candlelight bent unnaturally toward the sealed door, as if drawn by an unseen breath. Then a sound. Not a step. Not a voice. But a cracking. A long, slow fracture echoing through the chamber like ice breaking beneath a frozen lake. She turned. He stood in the archway now, but hunched, shaking. His skin had worsened, the cracks wider, pulsing with dim violet light beneath the surface. His eyes, once moon-pale, now shimmered with chaotic glints of starlight. And something else, pain. "You're breaking," Erin whispered. He nodded once, stiffly. "The gate pulls on me. Too many nights. Too many returns." He moved closer, slower than before. "If we open the first door," he said, "it will begin to seal me. It will start the transfer." Transfer of what? Of what's left of me? She almost asked what he meant, but stopped. Part of her already knew. "You want to pass through," she said. "But you can't. Not alone." His hands trembled as he reached toward the seal. The metal was ancient, covered in symbols that pulsed slowly as his fingers neared it. She saw now, it wasn't metal. It was organic. Bone perhaps. Grown, not forged. "Place your hand beside mine," he said. She hesitated only a moment, then stepped forward. His hand was cold, dry. Not like flesh, but something trying to remember what it felt like to be real. Together, their hands hovered over the seal. The symbols flared. The air turned sharp and electric. The stone beneath their feet shivered. Erin gasped. She felt something pulling on her, not her body but her presence, like fingers searching through her memories. She saw flashes, her first dig site in Queensland, her father's funeral, her nightmares after Luxor, and something else. A face. A woman she didn't know, smiling softly in a place that didn't exist. A sound like metal tearing through flesh. The seal split open down the center. But what lay beyond was not a hallway or chamber. It was space. Not outer space, not stars or blackness, but a void shaped like a room yet filled with nothing. The air inside looked like liquid shadow swirling slowly. At its center floated an object, round, stone, engraved with the same triangle inside circle symbol from the map. The man groaned behind her. She turned. He had dropped to one knee. His body spasmed violently. "What's happening to you?" she cried. "The pressure," he gasped. "I'm too close to the source." Erin turned back toward the void. The floating stone pulsed softly. She stepped inside. At once, the noise vanished. No footsteps, no breath, no heartbeat. It was like stepping into the core of a dream. She reached out, fingers brushing the stone. A single pulse of heat traveled up her arm. Then a voice, deep and not her own, echoed in her head. "One has answered." She recoiled. The stone dropped into her hands. It wanted to be taken. Behind her, the man screamed. She turned just in time to see him collapse fully, light bursting from the cracks in his limbs. His form was melting, warping. She ran back into the chamber. He writhed on the floor, body spasming, voice gurgling. "Stop," she shouted. "What do I do?" He looked up, eyes blazing. "You must close the door." "But I just opened it." He reached out with a final burst of strength, pressing one cracked hand over hers, guiding it back toward the seal. The door still stood open, the void swirling behind it, alive. "You opened the first," he whispered. "You'll need to open the second, before it consumes me." Then his form shattered into light and dust, disintegrating in her arms. The seal pulsed once more, then slammed shut, cutting off the void like a switch. Erin collapsed backward, heart racing. He was gone. No trace remained. No body. No footprints. Only a faint mark burned into the ground where he had stood. The symbol. The triangle in a circle. 7 stars. She clutched the stone token to her chest and began to cry. Not out of fear. Not even sadness. But because she realized something horrible. He hadn't lied. This was only the beginning. Chapter 5. The Garden of the Broken Moon. 3 days passed before Erin could bring herself to return underground. The first door had taken something from her. Not her mind, not fully, but some thread inside her had been tugged loose. She was still herself, but not entirely. At night, she heard whispers from corners that held no sound. The mirror in her room refused to reflect her face properly, always a second too late, or with eyes that didn't quite match hers. The map had changed again. It now pulsed softly in the dark like a heartbeat, and the first path, the one beneath the Sultan Hassan Mosque, had gone dim, as if it had finished its part. The second path glowed brighter now. It led to a ruined courtyard near the southern cemetery. Once a private garden during the Ottoman era, now it was forgotten, swallowed by decay and sand, resting beside crypts that time had abandoned. Locals called it Hadakat al-Qamar al-Maksar, the Garden of the Broken Moon. Erin arrived just after sunset. The city was alive behind her, honking cars, street vendors shouting, life moving forward as if the earth didn't hold monsters under its skin. She moved quietly down forgotten alleys, past rusted gates, to a section of wall overgrown with vines and dry fig trees. She crawled through a collapsed corner and stepped into the garden. The silence was immediate. No wind, no birds, no Cairo, just the garden. It was a place that had been beautiful once. She could see it in the bones, shattered fountains, broken tiles, the ghosts of benches where lovers once sat. Now it was ash and vine and rot. The moon above, a perfect half, looked wrong from inside this place, tilted, unfamiliar, as though viewed through water. She found the entrance near what had once been a fountain base, a cracked stone circle with symbols etched in its center. The same triangle, the same circle, but this time, the symbol had eyes. 7 of them, carved along the outer edge like watchful sentinels. She placed the first stone, the one taken from the void, at the center. It pulsed once, and the ground beneath her opened. Not like a hatch, not a trapdoor. It peeled away, folding down like paper soaked in ink. A stairway descended into pitch black. Erin adjusted her headlamp and stepped in. The air here was different. Not stale or cold, but wet with presence. Like stepping into a dream where the air itself watches you breathe. The stairs went down for too long. Longer than the space should allow. The walls were carved with the same looping spirals, but now they bled between the cracks, a thick black resin that pulsed faintly like veins. At the bottom, the tunnel twisted sharply, and reality shifted. The floor was no longer stone but glass, and beneath it, stars. Actual stars. Erin gasped. She knelt, pressing her hand to the glass. No heat, no texture, Just space. Moving, pulsing, infinite. Like walking across the surface of the void itself. Then a sound behind her. Breathing. Not hers. Slow. Ragged. Wet. She turned. A figure stood at the edge of the light, far down the hallway. It didn't move. She couldn't see its face. "Who are you?" she called. It didn't answer. She stepped back. The glass below cracked slightly beneath her boot. Just hairline, but enough to make her stomach drop. She moved carefully forward. The figure remained still, until suddenly it was gone. Vanished. But she didn't feel relief. She felt watched. Followed. The hallway twisted again and opened into a vast chamber. And there, in the center, was a massive circular gate. Not a door. Not a portal. A wound. The stone around it buckled and cracked like it was rejecting what had been embedded there. It pulsed in sync with the stone she carried. But standing in front of it, as if waiting for her, was him. The man from below. He was changed. His skin was whole again but translucent. Light bled through him like stained glass. His eyes no longer glowed. They burned like coals from an ancient fire. He wore no clothes now. Just a robe of shadows that clung to him like oil in water. "You returned," he said. His voice echoed strangely, now doubled as if two beings spoke from the same mouth. "I had to," Erin said quietly. He looked at the stone in her hand. "Place it." "Where?" He pointed to the gate. 7 indentations lined the outer ring. The second of 3 had already been filled, the first now faded. She stepped forward and set the stone in place. The gate screamed, not with sound but with pressure. Erin staggered back, ears ringing, vision swimming. The gate pulsed once, and from within, a face began to emerge. Not human. Elongated. Mouthless. Black eyes like polished obsidian. A face that wasn't designed to be seen, only felt. She backed away, trembling. "What is that?" He turned slowly toward her, voice distant. "It is me, before." Erin stared. "Before what?" "Before I became something you could look at." The face faded, drawn back into the gate. He knelt beside her. "You open too," he said. "The last will bring release." "Release from what?" He looked up at her, and his face, for just a moment, became her own. Same eyes. Same scar on her lip. Same breath. "I am what waits," he whispered. "And I remember everything you forgot." Chapter 6. The door without a name. The hotel stood like a monument to forgotten luxury, faded marble columns, dusty chandeliers, and a cracked fountain in the central atrium that hadn't worked in years. It was once known as Alcazar al-Abayad, the White Palace, built in the 1920s on top of the ruins of a Roman outpost. Most guests didn't know or care that its foundations were laid atop bones. Erin Monroe did. And tonight she had come to open the third door. She moved through the lobby unnoticed. The staff had seen her check in earlier that day under a different name, carrying a single duffel bag. She'd smiled politely, said she was a travel writer. No one questioned her. No one ever questioned someone who looked like they had a purpose. Her room was on the lowest floor. A corner suite that hadn't been used in months. Dust still lay thick on the curtains, and the air stank of mildew and something older. She set the bag down. Took out the map. It pulsed faintly now. The third path shimmered, winding like a spine toward the boiler room beneath the hotel, then plunging into stone untouched by human history. The third door waited. She descended at midnight. The maintenance stairwell was narrow, steep. Lights flickered above her as she passed old storage closets, rusted valves, and empty generator rooms. Rats scattered ahead of her, their nails scratching like whispers. At the bottom, she found the entrance, hidden behind a rusted electrical panel. She pried it loose. Behind the cables and metal frame, a small tunnel carved into the bedrock, just like the others, but colder. So much colder. She lit her headlamp and crawled through. The tunnel twisted violently like it had been grown, not dug. The walls pulsed faintly, moist with condensation that smelled of metal and old breath. She pressed forward on hands and knees, deeper and deeper until the stone changed, became smooth, shining, and then it opened, wide and tall, into a space that should not have fit beneath the city. It was massive, a cathedral of dark stone, domed with impossible angles and architecture that made her head hurt if she stared too long. Symbols drifted across the ceiling like stars moving in water, no longer carved but alive. The floor was a perfect mirror, reflecting everything except her. In the center waiting was the third door, obsidian, covered in 7 seals. 6 were now pulsing with dim light. Only one remained, and at its foot, sitting like a man too tired to stand, was him, the man from below. But he was no longer a man. His body was fracturing, light bleeding through like a stained glass window under pressure. His voice, when he spoke, sounded layered, like a choir whispering through a throat made of glass. "You came," he said. Erin nodded. Her voice was gone. Her hands trembled. "I have the third," she whispered. He lifted a shaking hand. "Then you must decide." She stared. "Decide what?" "To open the last door," he said. "A price must be paid." "I've already paid." "Not enough." He stood, barely swaying. His body flickered like a flame in wind. Parts of him broke off into ash and vanished. "I am memory," he said. "I am what was buried. But to return I need form. A bridge." Her stomach turned. "You want to take my body?" "No," he said gently. "I want to share it." He stepped back. "I'm not a vessel." "You are the vessel," he said. "Chosen before you were born. The dreams. The pull. The silence in Luxor. You think that was an accident?" She shook her head. "This is insane." He reached forward. And suddenly, the chamber vanished. He was in a desert. Alone. Stars overhead. Then a house. Her childhood home. Her father alive, smiling. Then a graveyard. A tunnel. A scream. Her own. Then blackness. When she woke, she was on her knees in front of the final door. The third stone, the last, was in her hand. It pulsed. Hot. Waiting. He stood above her now, fully whole, glowing with calm light. "I cannot force you," he said. "But if I don't?" she asked. "The door stays closed. And I remain a dream. A voice. Forgotten. And if I do, then you will know truth." He stared at the door. She didn't know how long passed. Finally she stood, and she placed the stone. The seal vanished. The door opened. Inside was not light, not sound, but weight. A crushing pressure of memory, existence, time. She stumbled forward, and behind her, he followed. She didn't come back. Not the next day, not the next week. The room she had rented remained untouched. The duffel bag still on the floor. The map gone, erased. In a dream far from Cairo, a little boy woke in a small village in Canada. He stared at the corner of his dark room and whispered, "She's here." His mother asked who he meant. He just pointed, and in the shadow something shimmered. Watching, smiling, remembering. Plug. Echoes beneath the dust. The hotel closed 3 months later. Alcazar Al-Abayad had never been particularly busy, but after a string of strange events, blackouts, plumbing that groaned without cause, and one guest reportedly vanishing through a solid wall, the owners gave up. They boarded the place up, covered the atrium fountain with concrete, welded the basement access shut, and then left it to rot. But the whispers never stopped. Local children claimed to hear footsteps in the walls when they walked past. A homeless man camping outside said a pale woman with cracked lips and glowing eyes offered him something older than time. He never explained what. He died 3 days later, his eyes wide open, pupils gone white. 2 months after the closure, a new construction permit was filed. A foreign development company planned to turn the ruins into luxury apartments. They sent a surveying team underground. They never came back. Police searched for 3 hours and found nothing. Only an old maintenance corridor that ended in a blank wall and strange black veins spreading across the floor. They sealed the building again, quietly. No press. No official explanation. Cairo moved on. But beneath the earth, where the stone still remembers, where the silence still breathes, where the watchers still wait, a new door began to take shape. Not with hands, but with memory, and it waits even now, for you.
The story is over now, and by now, I imagine you're already asleep. Drifting somewhere quiet, somewhere familiar, maybe even a street you almost remember. But if you're still awake, that's okay too. Just breathe slowly. Let the weight of the day fade away. The music you're hearing is designed to help you fall asleep faster and sink deeper into rest, even if strange dreams follow. There are no more tapes tonight. No more humming. Just your body relaxing and your mind slipping softly into sleep. Thank you for spending your night with us, here in the Sleepy Horror Vault. Until next time, sweet dreams.